Fantastic. Thank you, Jacob. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the October 12th, 2020 Council briefing. We're starting up here at 5:30. We've got two items on the agenda tonight. Before we dive into those two items, I did want to do just a little bit of housekeeping items with the council with regards to upcoming meeting and briefing dates. In taking a look at the calendar, as you're all aware, our next council meeting next Monday on the 19th will go back to in-person. And the questions that I have for you are whether or not we want to consider continue with the alternating of having meeting, briefing. And if so, do you want those briefings to be done virtually or do you want them in person? And if in person, do you want them stacked with the meetings on the first and third Mondays of each month? I've put together a little calendar here, and Jacob, do I have the screen sharing capability?
You should. If not, now you do. Oh, you're muted, Mike.
Is everyone seeing a calendar on their screen? Not yet.
Yeah, you do. Oh, there you go.
There we go. So if we take a look at the month of November, I've kind of scripted these out. If we wanted to do the meetings in person and the briefings virtually, you can all see the cursor, I presume. We'd have a meeting on the 2nd, briefing on the 9th, meeting on the 16th, and then we could do either a briefing on the 23rd or 30th, keeping in mind that Thanksgiving and the day after Thanksgiving are the 26th and 27th during that particular week of the 23rd. I know that somewhere in here, there may also be a transition of council to the new council, depending on how quickly the results of the election are certified from the 3rd. But with that being said, I'd still be looking for some input from council with regards to November and then ultimately December. If we scroll down a little bit and take a look at December, we will see that the first meeting takes place on the 7th. And the second meeting would be on the 21st, the week of Christmas and Christmas Eve, with a briefing in the middle. One of the thought processes there is that maybe this would just be a one briefing month that we have on the 14th, if we do it virtually. I'm not sure anyone would really want to have a briefing on the 28th, since that's in between Christmas and New Year's, and a lot of people might be taking vacation time. What I'd like to do is just hear from each of you what your preferences are, whether or not you want them stacked on the 1st and 3rd in person, or whether or not you want to continue with virtual. And if so, what your preference is for the end of November and December.
I'll throw out there that, am I muted? No, you got me, okay. I'd recommend we do the council meetings and briefing staggered and do the briefing on virtual.
So you're saying stagger them and not stack them?
You know, when you've got the virtual capability, it's really not that much of an inconvenience to sit down for a little while and have a meeting in your house. But if you're going to do briefing and council meeting at the same time, that usually turns into a pretty long evening. So I can do either really, but that's my recommendation.
So your recommendation is to keep them
stagger and do a virtual meeting for the briefings.
Okay.
I concur with Charlie, the staggered meetings, but the briefing for the 28th, I don't see a need for the 28th briefing because there is no first Monday of January meeting. So we could forget the 28th one and then have it on the second, have a briefing on the second Monday of January for the third Monday of January's meeting. So that would be the 28th of December. So the 23rd, I could see the staggered. I don't see a big deal before Thanksgiving. And then the 28th, we wouldn't have a briefing. We would wait until the second Monday of January for the briefing.
Okay.
I agree with that.
I would just put out there, I mean, it doesn't really apply to me because as you noted, there will definitely be a transition in November, but there's not that many people watching this on YouTube live. some of my constituents have kind of mentioned that they're looking forward to the in-person council meetings and briefings. Like I said, for the next, couple of weeks, it's probably fine that I'll do them, stagger them. But I mean, I would just say for the future, try and get people involved. I don't think the virtual thing's the way to go. There's a lot of people who are traditional, like to have their voice heard, and especially for new members of council. I think just having them in person may actually help them and for their so-called like training or just their blooding when it comes to sitting on their board and getting to know people. We're all comfortable with each other, but I would assume it may be a little awkward for some of the new council members for the first few months anyway. But I'm just putting that out there. But as I said, it doesn't really apply to me.
Councilor,
I'm fine doing the briefings virtually. We don't have a lot of attendance at those anyway, and they are, they may not, they can't participate anyway in them, and they have an access to be able to go back and see them on YouTube because we are going to record them and put them on there. And I think it's easier to watch this format at a later date on YouTube than it is the other way we were doing it in person. So, I mean, I think it's a lot easier to see what people are saying and understand what's going on in this format if you're watching it at a later date. But I'm fine with staggering them, doing the meetings, the actual council meetings live, and doing these electronically.
Councilor Golding?
I agree with everyone, and I would just add that as a citizen who used to attend the council briefings, it's really hard to hear sometimes when you're in that room. And I think that people can hear what's going on, even if they want to watch it live while we're doing our briefings. I just feel like it's so much easier to be able to hear what people are saying in this kind of format than it was in the briefing room. So I support doing the briefings virtually.
Fantastic. It looks like the consensus I'm getting is that for the month of November, we will stagger and we will have the second briefing on November 23rd, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving. For the month of December, we will only have one briefing. We will not have one on the 28th. And since January is a one meeting month with the meeting occurring on the 18th, we'll do a briefing the Monday before on January 11th. And my guess is when we have a new council seated, which will depend on the certification of the election by the supervisor of elections, we'll probably have a seating somewhere in either end of November or some point in December. And then when we get to that January 11th briefing, we can have the conversation again with the new seated council to see if everybody's on the same page. That is exactly the guidance I was looking for on that item. Thank you all very much. With that, I'd like to dive into the first item that's on the agenda tonight, which is discussion of short-term vacation rental and some of the issues that we are running into from an organization with administration of this particular program. If any of you checked your email before this meeting started, you would have seen that about 5 o'clock. I sent a quick little update. There was a version of the document that went out that did not have the correct numbers regarding host compliance and what they are charging us. So with that being said, an update went out at 5 o'clock. What it should reference is that host compliance's original contract is just under $20,000, $19,459. The new contract that they are proposing to us, and they have been bought out by another company, is an original quote of $27,700. We are looking to eliminate the 24/7 complaint hotline, which comes with that scope, which would take the contract price down to $23,000, which makes it a little bit more palatable for us with regards to what they're doing for us. But what I wanted to do was walk you through a little bit of the history of what we've done so far since this ordinance was enacted back in the fall of 2019, how COVID has impacted that a bit, and what we're actually seeing here within the organization and some of the issues that we think we might run into as we move forward. And that's where we're looking for some direction from council. So again, a little bit of the background. Fall of last year, the City Council adopted a new short-term vacation rental ordinance that required registration at the local level and also required inspections to be performed by the city organization. We started sending out letters to all the different properties that we knew were being used for short-term vacation rental starting in January. As you can imagine, within the first 30 to 60 days, we started to get the impact of COVID-19. And sure enough, when we entered March, we were having safer at home orders, which were ordering the shutdown of all non-essential businesses. And it also required the shutdown of short-term vacation rentals in the state of Florida. So not only were a lot of the property owners non-responsive to our requests, we were also not necessarily aggressively pursuing the follow-up for that first round of letters. We knew that a lot of the homes were not licensed or authorized to be operating during that time frame. What we did note, though, was that once we got into a point where short-term vacation rentals could be allowed to operate again, we started resending letters in July of this past summer. And if you take a look at Exhibit A, I believe, which is the update from Planning and Development, I'd like to call your attention to the fourth bullet down under the first block, where we have received a total of 48 short-term vacation rental applications to date, and we've issued a total of 38 certificates. If you go a little bit further down, as of 9/30/2020, and take a look at the second bullet, you'll see that we are currently aware of approximately 130 non-compliant properties that require a certificate and have not applied to the city. And these are properties that have received notice from us that they need to move forward and register. The reason that this is now starting to pose an issue to us is from the perspective of where we go from here. Obviously, the next step from the city's perspective would be to start taking properties in front of the special magistrate. In speaking with the city attorney and the attorney having conversations with the magistrate, we're probably looking realistically at anywhere from 5 to 10 properties per magistrate meeting in order to take on that enforcement action. That means we're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from 13 to 20 meetings with the special magistrate to get through all of the properties that we currently know are non-compliant. I think the number of non-compliant properties is a little bit of a surprise to us. We had a lot of property owners that were telling, the ones that are trying to comply, tell us that they had issues with getting documents from the state or from the county agencies or from their marketing firms, whoever they're using as their third-party provider in order to provide us for their documentation due to COVID-19. But for the ones that have been non-responsive, we're seeing this as a big issue with regards to the legal prosecution going forward. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Ambrosio to talk to you a little bit about some of his findings, which are encapsulated in Exhibit C, of what the city can expect if we move forward with those 10 to 20 meetings with the special magistrate, and where we may find ourselves 6 to 12 months from now.
Thank you, Mike. And then, Mike, I'd suggest that we hear from, from Heather, Bill, and Steve, so they can give a broader picture of what we're dealing with in action. So for purposes of enforcement, and well, let me review that. I've spoken to our magistrates, our primary and our alternate. Both happen to be independently as practicing attorneys. They are very familiar with the litigation that's going on around the state as it relates to short-term rentals, because their firm handles a lot of that, and they've had contacts around the state of what's been happening. I've also spoken to several other attorneys from local jurisdictions that are dealing with the regulations and enforcement, and then also did some of my own research. So as Mike pointed out, the magistrates and I think that based on the volume of what we have at this point, we would handle approximately 5 to 10 cases per hearing. I think that's a little ambitious because the cases and the evidence and the arguments, it could take a long time per hearing. So we agree that the hearings would be full day hearings. And I think that we'd be lucky to get 5 cases heard. The cases that are not heard, procedurally, they would be scheduled for the next available full day of hearings. So any cases that were scheduled, for example, for the second day of hearings, any cases that get bumped over to those second day, then we'd have the second day most likely bumped to the third, and then so on down the line. So in terms of scheduling and hearing the matters, it could become pretty complex, very lengthy, and probably 13 to 20 different hearings scheduled. In terms of properly preparing a case to bring it to the magistrate, we would have to develop an evidentiary file. And so the evidence would consist of affidavits and testimony, photographs, post-compliance records, and any witnesses that we could have available to help represent our case to the magistrate. And developing that file could take a long time as well. And the city should expect that the opposing side won't just lay down, meaning they'll probably bring counter suits against us and counter evidence against us that we would have to be able to rebut. And it's very difficult to predict that scenario on a case-by-case basis. But it's not just simply a prosecution of a case. We should expect defensive actions, counter suits, and in some instances, we may experience suits against us, and they could take the shape in several ways. One, the magistrates and I have spoken about the fact that there have been some cases around the state where cities are being challenged and sued based on the constitutionality and the validity of their short-term vacation rental ordinance in of itself. So we're not even talking about dealing with an enforcement challenge or a failure to comply with our registration. We're talking about parties that want to sue us for claiming that we don't even have constitutional authority to either enter this ordinance, or our ordinances are invalid, or it's unconstitutional. So there is, once we stir up this pot, there's a chance that we may get suits like that. I suggest that the time and the cost and the workload burdens are pretty immense for enforcing this, because I would want to avoid the city having a challenge of selective enforcement. Now, I know that Heather has, she has a timeline of those properties that have been the longest in duration of not being in compliance. Of course, we have some that we've perhaps received more complaints about than others, but we would need to be very careful about the groups or properties that we start to prosecute. Meanwhile, we have 100 other, another 100 at the end, at the far end, that we won't be able to prosecute for many, many months. And that's an additional challenge that we can be confronted with, which is those properties that we decide to prosecute first, we could be charged with a selective enforcement. Why do they stand out any differently than any other property? Why are we enforcing against these 5 or 6 properties versus any of the other 70 or 80? Because we can't handle all at the same time. There's going to be a distance in time as to when I can handle some and when I could handle the others. So we may face selective enforcement actions against us. The magistrates believe that we would experience pretty high legal fees and lawyer time, pretty high magistrate time. And again, the city would be obligated to pay the magistrate for their time spent preparing for the cases, addressing the cases, appearing for the hearing, drafting the orders. And then if you remember early on in my appointment, I brought to council the resolution for us to recover attorney's fees for any of my legal work that I do in litigation. But there's no guarantee that we'll be able to win that attorney's fee. So I can't guarantee that we'll always be able to recover the time that I would spend on it in order to have to recoup some attorney's fees for the time that I spend prosecuting those. Although we have that in place, but I can't guarantee that we'll be able to prevail on that. And then so the last point about the enforcement and the legal aspect of it is, I spoke to a couple of the other jurisdictions that are dealing with it as well. And they feel like, it is time consuming, that it does take staff time as well. So not just the legal prep and management of the case, preparation of the evidence, but there could be a series of appeals. And then the appeals the first step of the litigation, it would involve staff time. If we get appealed, there's a chance that I may need more assistance and help and input from staff. So, in addition to legal fees or legal time that could somewhat be measurable, it's very hard to put your finger on exactly how much time would that take and involve, for Heather to be involved in helping me prep the documents, prep witnesses for testimony. And that's very difficult for me to measure. I can't represent how much time that would take, but the magistrate said, certainly this is going to take staff time. And in fact, I don't know if Heather has the bandwidth to keep up with it all, quite frankly, with the number of cases that I would have to prosecute. So those are some of the points in terms of enforcement, legal aspects, and I'd be glad to answer any questions on it further. But Bill, Heather, and Steve are on, and I met with them at length a couple of times, and then as recently today. We put together a lot of good information, which Mike prepared for you guys, and we're all available to answer your questions. But right now I can answer on enforcement, legality, magistrate proceedings, appeals, anything like that.
I'm seeing some hands raised, and I'm not sure that we need to do any more of a presentation specifically because we do have the summary memo and the exhibits for you. And we do have Chris, Heather, Bill, and Steve all on the line. If you have questions with anything from the application process through the inspections all the way to the legal enforcement. Councilmember Vogel saying, I think you have your hand up first.
I think we passed this with knowing that it's a problem. And just because it's going to be difficult to enforce, I don't think, in my opinion, is an excuse to abandon it. Really, that's kind of the question is, okay, so we can't enforce this very well, so we should just abandon the whole thing. And I think we owe it to our residents, no matter how much that costs, to enforce the laws that we enact and had overwhelming support to get enacted. So what I would ask staff to do, just a quick Google research when I was presented the memo and the statistics from you, Mike, with regard to the numbers we have, and then host compliance giving us their numbers, which kind of looks like their service is nowhere near what they talked it up to be. I found several other people that offer the same service, and Granicus.com, LodgingRevs.com, and Hamari.com. I'll say Hamari, Hamari.com, has several Florida clients. I just think it might be worth reaching out to these other individual companies and see what they do differently. Obviously, host compliance has a significant number of clients, so maybe we're getting lost in the shuffle and these other people offer a different service, maybe cheaper or maybe not cheaper, but can at least distinguish themselves from host compliance and to get us some more information. In looking at Hamari's website, they had a couple of case studies they posted with a couple other cities and talked about numbers pre them coming in and then post them coming in. which was interesting to read. And part of their, I guess, selling point is they have a online portal where they upload at least 2 pieces of supporting evidence in a particular case against a vacation rental. So I think that helps on the legal side of things if they have a portal where they're uploading specific pieces of evidence to, and then we're able to utilize that evidence in a case. I think that takes a lot more effort off staff. I agree that it's going to be time consuming, but I don't know of another way to do it except putting in the time and making the effort. And if we need to hire people dedicated to this specific issue, then we might need to do that from an administrative point of view, not from a supervisory type perspective, but at least administrative, handling paperwork, looking and organizing cases, creating case files, things like that. That's my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Vogelsang. And staff is not recommending one way or the other which way we move. We just wanted to make sure that council is fully aware of where we're at and where this may go over the next 60 to 90 days, if not 6 months. We didn't want anything to be a surprise to you about where we were from a status update with regards to STVR. Mayor Latham, you have your hand up next.
Thank you, sir. Hey, I agree with Phil and what Phil said. One of the things I was thinking the whole time that Chris was giving his brief was, what about the other side? The other side is, for 3 years, we've represented Florida cities just like ours at the legislative level for Senate and House committee meetings to push and push and push. Remember now, this isn't just about rentals up on east of A1A. This is about rentals companies going into neighborhoods, buying homes and turning them into hotels. We've set some pretty good ground rules in place. Initially, the legislature was going to allow the people who had legislation in effect, I think it was from 2011, to be not to fall in the same, they were waived, I guess is the best way to put it, over the new requirements they were pushing in the last legislature. If we don't have a strong front, they're going to trample all over us. If we have a strong front when we go into Tallahassee again next session, we've got this program, we've invested the money to put it in place. We've got these third-party people coming in to do some of the work to make sure it gets done. These arguments will typically get the legislature to listen, and we'll get things to turn our way again. But if we go in there and say it's too hard, they're just going to say, great, let's make this one rule applies to all. And, we're going to send DVPR out there, all 14 of them, to cover the state of Florida, and nothing's going to happen, except the values are going to drop, neighborhoods are going to disappear, and you're not going to find people 20 years from now walking up saying, I'm a Fletcher graduate, because it's going to be nothing but rentals around here. So we really need to fight hard to keep the image up there and keep the battle going. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilor Doherty.
Yeah, well said, Phil and Charlie. I mean, I don't think any of us are really surprised that this happened. There was a reluctance on the when we were discussing this, and we were having our staff look at ways of regulation, and there was a lot of people that just, I could tell, weren't going to comply. And I remember at one stage there was statistics out there saying we had over 300 of these properties. And as Charlie noted, without regulation, you're going to see more proliferation of these things. People, it's good money, especially if you're not paying tax or you're not buying any occupational licenses. You're not bringing your things up to code, which was the whole point of us. We're not anti-business here. We're just trying to get people to play on an even playing field. And as far as what Chris was saying about potential lawsuits, there are always going to be potential lawsuits. I think we all knew that going into this. But while we have people that are compliant, it's not fair to them either if we just, because of the potential heavy workload, just decide not to bother with it. And this is going to be where we bring the majority of these businesses, which is what I'm going to call them, into compliance. This will be the heaviest workload that we have. And I'm sure we can, as far as showing, not favoritism, but as far as like the timing, where you're saying we can only do a certain number per magistrate meeting. I mean, I don't know how we pick who's to go first and who's to be regulated or brought in front of the magistrate first. But obviously, we're not showing any favoritism. We're not picking on anybody. It is what it is. We can't hear every case at the same time. But really, you know, these people need to just play by the rules. They need to have their tax IDs. They need to have their inspections by the fire marshal. They need to buy their pay for their occupational license, which I recall we made very, very, very affordable. I'm tired of hearing COVID as an excuse. The governor he lifted that ban on short-term rentals months ago. I believe it was July. So really, yeah, people can come up with every excuse, but you need to just do this. If you want to run a reputable business, just do it. So I suggest, yeah, it is going to be difficult. We definitely need an outside body to help us gather information. But it's not like, you know, just look up the listing on VRBO or Airbnb. That should be evidence enough. If you're listing your property for lease, that shows your intent. I don't think we need photographs of people going in and out of houses or witnesses. It's there in black and white. If you're using an agency to promote your business, then you need to make. It's the same as any other business. There's rules and regulations. So yeah, we need to continue with this. It's going to be a bit of a pain for a while, but the alternative is just do nothing, and then we've wasted hundreds of hours of research, discussion, and as Charlie said, we're just going to end up upsetting the residents, and we're going to change the dynamic of our communities. So it's going to be painful, but we have to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next is Councillor Dumont.
Thanks, Mike. I see this in two different ways. One is business, and for businesses to actually compete and markets to work, they have to compete on the same playing field. And that means everybody should be registered and licensed and go through the same regulations that the other ones are supposed to. The other piece that I look at is our residents. We are here representing our residents as well. And some of their quality of life has been decreased from the poorly run vacation rentals in their neighborhoods. And I don't think because it's difficult to enforce or that it's costly to enforce, that that's a reason to let everybody just have their own way with their vacation rentals. We spent a lot of time on this. I agree with everybody who's spoken before me. Just follow the rules, pay the registration stuff, go through the inspections that you need to go through to ensure that those who are staying on your properties or in your homes are safe and secure, and that the neighborhoods are actually still neighborhoods at the end game of this. We really need to relook at our vendor. The host compliance person entity. We really need to do more of a market analysis as to where we get the best bang for our buck. When I looked at those numbers, I was rather disappointed in the numbers that they said that we had, and that they really weren't aligned with how we defined what a short-term vacation rental was, in addition to the calls that they took in, and some of it just didn't apply. So I was kind of disappointed in that. So we really need to relook at the vendor that we contract with. But I put our residents first, and our residents need to make sure that they maintain their quality of life in their neighborhoods. And so I'd move forward with this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be costly. But this is something that really impacts one's quality of life.
Thank you, Counselor Dumont. Counselor Nichols.
I guess the main point I want to make is that, I mean, I'm not too afraid of us enforcing it, and I believe we should. We modeled this off of existing case law that has been proven to be for us to be able to uphold the decisions that we've included in this. So, I mean, I'm not too worried about, lawsuits. I mean, I think we took a lot of time and effort in developing it to make sure it was defendable. As for some of the other potential actions that can be brought against us, I mean, I think, it's something that we're just gonna have to deal with. I don't think we're setting ourselves up for anything that is, we wouldn't have done this if we weren't gonna be able to enforce it. And we need to do everything we can to try to enforce it. And back to what the mayor said, I agree. This is just another key in the home rule portion of what we're doing. And we need to stick to our guns, and if we're not going to do it, then, it's just we're going to have nothing very soon. And it really does impact the residents' quality of life. And maybe not everybody, but if it does impact your life, it really impacts your life. I've heard some horror stories, and I just feel horrible for those people. And, I think we need to do what we can to continue to make this a community. Otherwise, we will get overrun by short-term rentals.
Thank you. Counselor Golding.
I'm not going to rehash all the things that everyone else said, that everyone said so well. I really agree with everything. The only thing I would say is that, back when we were looking at this ordinance, I looked at, what some of the current short-term rentals were doing, and there were a lot that were not paying the taxes that they were supposed to be paying. They weren't paying the fees that they were supposed to be paying. And I agree, we have got to get everybody on the same level playing field, and this is the only way to do it. My thinking is that once we start enforcing this, I would hope that we would see some of the players come into compliance, because they realize, okay, now we have to do something about this. So I hope that number that would have to go before the special magistrate would drop, and that we wouldn't see 130 that we have to take to the special magistrate. And I agree totally with Corey and with Charlie. This is about home rule, and we have got to protect our home rule, and we've got to protect our residents. I too have heard too many horror stories, and our neighborhoods need to stay neighborhoods. So I support us continuing to move forward with the enforcement.
Thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
Same, I don't want to rehash what everybody else has said, but this conversation just reminds me of how unified we were on this issue. And I believe it passed unanimously after many, many meetings, meetings with people on both sides of the issue, phone calls, emails. And I think that we owe it to all of that work to stick with it. And I agree, encouraging some voluntary compliance by making sure that the vacation rental owners know that we're serious about this. The thing that I wrote down on my notes was, is host compliance the only option? And I do think that it does not seem like we are getting a lot of bang for that buck. And I would like to see what the other options are for the same or similar service. And then I don't want to miss a chance to deliver a compliment on our website, because I critique it so often, but the website information on coming into compliance with a short-term rental is very good. There's links, there's all kinds of information, there's FAQs, there's a specific website. So I feel like we did, and I don't know where that came into play compared to when we passed this legislation, but I feel like there's a lot of good information on there. And yes, it's complicated to bring your vacation rental into compliance at first, but once you're there, it should be easy to maintain. And hopefully we would see that within our city as well in terms of the enforcement.
Thank you. And back to Mayor Latham.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. Just a very quick comment. I really believe that if we kind of knuckle down and put the law out there again and make sure people understand what it is and start to enforce it, the number of magistrate cases again start to get just proportionally smaller. with each passing week, because everybody's going to know we mean business and we're taking it for action. Just another tidbit to throw in there.
Well, I appreciate the clear input from council. We will regroup on our end and see if there's anything that we need council authorization for from a resource perspective in order to move forward. But if we do, we will come back to you accordingly. And if not, we'll hopefully provide an update once we have the new council seated with how we're making out from a progress perspective. I think this is one of those topics that makes sense to probably provide a quarterly update to council so that you understand where we are with everything as we move forward. Thank you all very much.
Bill Mann has his hand, had his hand raised. Back up.
Bill Mann still has his hand raised. Mr. Mann, would you like to comment?
Just a couple of points of clarification. Host compliance has been bought by Granicus. That's why Granicus is now a player in the field. When we did the analysis about who we would get to assist us with doing the address capture, Host compliance is by far the most thorough in the market, followed secondly by Harmari. I didn't find any other firms that were even up on equal par with either of those two firms. We are technically out of our first year contract. Host compliance has contacted us and informed us that due to COVID, they're giving a 3-month extension for free of that contract. And I'm not trying to sell their services necessarily, but they are doing what we asked them to do. They're capturing the full database of these properties. It's the choice of the individual property owners or the business operator not to comply. So I'm not really sure that host compliance is the issue. The one point where we broke out the numbers for the contract, speaking with staff, with Heather and with Steve Shadow, the hotline is not really serving us a great purpose because people call in on Friday and Saturday, and normally it would get relayed to our code enforcement officer, and we don't have code enforcement on the weekends. But the type of complaints that really require instant response are complaints that any property owner, any neighbor of any residence or of Airbnb would either call the police if it's for noise or for parking. So we think we can handle that more effectively at the local level. So that's just a comment. So that's why I didn't want you to think that, hey, we don't need a hotline anymore. We don't think we're getting the value from that. So I just wanted to put those points in. But other than that, again, as Mike said, we're neutral on this. We're not trying to say we don't want to keep doing this. We're trying to tell you where we are in the real world right now. And that was it. Thanks.
Councilor Dumont.
Thank you. So Bill raised a good question there. A good point that we don't have code enforcement on the weekend. And should we have code enforcement on the weekend? I think is a question that we should look at, because you see a lot of people who want to do things outside of code. They wait until Friday afternoon when they know code is not going to be there, and they do it throughout the weekend, and they pull their stuff like little snipe signs and things like that. So possibly we might want to think about having code enforcement on the weekend, not possibly every weekend, but roaming weekends, so they don't know when code enforcement is there, which would help to incentivize them staying in compliance on weekends, not knowing if they'd get caught that weekend or not get caught that weekend. But that's an administrative thing, so you have fun with that. And I totally know that it would involve overtime and more resources, but that really is something that we should look at, because we've all seen Friday afternoon a plethora of new signs come up, and then Monday morning they are all gone because they know that code enforcement's going to be there. So just a thought.
Thank you. With no more hands raised and clear direction, I think we're done with item 1. We will now move on to item 2, which is discussion of the city attorney position. At last Monday's council meeting, the item for the annual evaluation of the city attorney was moved to be tabled to be brought back at the next meeting next Monday on the 19th. Since that time, there has been correspondence issued by the city attorney to the city council. I have been contacted by multiple council members asking if there could be a special meeting or some opportunity for the council to speak about this particular issue. I thought it was best that we put it on the end of this particular briefing since we only had the one item to talk about. This is really an item that we can have the conversation however you want. Mayor, I would like to actually turn this over to you from a chairing perspective, because I think this is really a conversation that needs to occur amongst the council members, and if necessary, the city attorney, and not necessarily any other individual from within the organization. So with that being said, I would turn it over to you, and there is one hand raised from Council Member Golden.
Okay. I'm going to give just a 20-second summary here, and then we'll start opening the floor to everybody. There was a concern during the contract negotiation discussion that concerned the stipend agreement and how it was negotiated and whether or not there was an ethical issue. Shortly after that, we were notified that the city attorney was going to resign. Since then, I can tell you that I've spoken with 3 outside attorneys to see what we can do. Whether or not it would be appropriate for us to take that stipend and put it into the negotiations for a little bit higher salary increase, which they all agreed would eliminate the problem. The other thing is we still have an outstanding letter of resignation. And if the city attorney were interested to pursue this other option, then we'd need him to submit a retraction of the letter of resignation for us to take the next action, which would be renegotiate through Phil a new or modified agreement that would take the stipend issue away. So it's going to be more than a one-step process, but that's kind of where we are today and what we're talking about. So Ms. Golding, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have several things I'd like to say, and so if you guys could just give me a few minutes, I'd really appreciate it. At this time last week, I would have never guessed we'd have this issue before us, and because of a citizen's concern that I raised and because of the way I raised it, our city attorney has submitted his resignation. And I want to say that I believe in Chris's integrity and his ability to serve as our city attorney. And I truly hope I can clear the air on this matter tonight and persuade Chris to withdraw his resignation. I'd like to provide a little more information, and I sincerely hope that it will help to repair any damage that has been done. The weekend prior to our October 5th meeting, a citizen brought to my attention Florida Statute 112.313 subsection 6. And this is not a statute that I thought anything about, to be honest with you, until this was brought to me. And they suggested that it might not be appropriate for the city attorney to request a benefit, in this case, the stipend. Now, the citizen is an attorney, and so that's why I listened to what they were saying. And they explained that they were aware that in the past, another city had hired outside legal counsel to advise the city's counsel on issues that would benefit the city attorney, just to ensure that they were not running into any issues with the Florida statute. Now, I'm not an attorney, and I read the statute, and from a layperson's point of view, I couldn't rule out that whether it was relevant or not. So I discussed the matter with Chris on the day of our city council meeting, and he did say he would check with the Commission on Ethics. And then at our council meeting that night, I brought up the citizen's concern and suggested that to remove any perception that we were doing anything inappropriate, that we might consider having outside counsel weigh in on the matter. And Mr. Vogelsang did ask Chris to check with the Commission on Ethics and send us an email with his findings, and he did agree to do that. But 2 days later, Chris emailed us his resignation. So clearly I said and did something wrong, and I accept full responsibility for any mistakes that I've made in this whole process. To better understand where I went wrong, I contacted the State Commission on Ethics, and I spoke with Carolyn Clanky, and who's an attorney there. She was extremely helpful and said that the statute in reference is one that by far generates the most inquiries and concerns. She also said that in matters of city attorney benefit negotiations, There is not a concern with regard to Florida Statute 112.313 subsection 6. And this was the answer that I needed, the citizen's concern. Ms. Clanky also stated that some cities that can afford to do so do hire outside legal counsel to provide advice regarding matters that would benefit the city attorney. She said this is ideal and protects the public's trust, but it's not necessary. She also added that the goal should be for the city council to receive unimpeachable information, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from a third party. It can be done by the city attorney, providing us with all the information we need to make a sound decision. We all know that there are people out there that would find our council meetings and briefings to be boring, but we also know that there are people out there that pay close attention. And this lawyer citizen that brought up this issue is one example of someone who is paying attention. Based on that citizen's input, I felt it was important to bring up their concern to make sure we're doing things properly. I can see that my question about whether it was appropriate for the city attorney to request the stipend benefit could have seemed confrontational and be perceived as questioning Chris's ethics. And I assure you, I did not mean it to be. I just wanted to make sure we're doing the right thing. My question was not intended to be personal against Chris or to damage Chris's reputation. That's the last thing I want to do. It was strictly based on the process and what was appropriate or not. We have never had an in-house city attorney before, and we've never been through this process before. It's a learning experience for us all, and one in which I hope will result in a process that is unquestionable and completely transparent. I want Chris to know that I think you've done a fantastic job for our city, in addition to all that you've done to establish the city attorney's office and to handle the business of the city, including additional demands imposed by the COVID restrictions. And you've definitely been especially helpful to me with all of my questions. So I'm sincerely sorry that I've appeared to question your integrity by bringing up the concern about the Florida statute. And I assure you that was never my intent. I think you've been a great asset for the city, and I sincerely hope you will consider withdrawing your resignation.
Thank you, Ms. Golding. Very well said. Appreciate it. Mr. Vogelsang?
Sandy, I appreciate those words. I had a lot of discussions just from an attorney perspective with Chris after this. And I think one thing we hold in high regard is our ethical standard. I think that ties in line. He couldn't help but take it as a personal attack. And I think that's where it went wrong. And those discussions in the future, just from an educational perspective, in my opinion, need to be done behind closed doors or done via calling the commission on ethics or whatever before you make an accusation with the little information you had. And what I intended to bring forward today was to read the very paragraph before I can't believe it was an attorney, because that's blowing my mind, that gave you that information. But number 5 in the same legal ethics code under 112 says that no government attorney shall be prevented from considering any matter affecting his or her salary, expenses, or any other compensation as a local government attorney. So the code, and I'm sure Ms. Clanky covered that with you, the law allows them to negotiate their salary and any other benefits. So it was sad that it came this far. I hope and would express to Chris that he would withdraw his resignation. I don't think there's a need to change the stipend language. But Mr. Mayor, I've had discussions with Chris already, just because you had alluded to negotiating again. I do not think that's necessary. If he's willing to take away his resignation, he'd be willing to change the salary to 165 and do away with the stipend. If he's willing to do that, I don't think we need to negotiate, but as long as the council, I'll kind of welcome everybody's thoughts on whether the stipend would want to stay or not stay. And then Chris and I can have a quick offline conversation this week about it, but I think it just boils down to the way that he felt he was being accused and to not go down that road in the future with regard to his reputation. It's not worth one's reputation to go down that road. So I hope that your statement was as well received to him as it was to me. I do really appreciate that, Sandy, because I think that goes a long way to show what your intentions were, and it didn't mean that. Didn't mean it in the way it came across. So obviously it caused a little bit of drama, but I just wanted to tell you I do appreciate you coming forward and speaking first and accepting responsibility with the way it came across. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vogelsang. Obviously, we're not in a council meeting. We're in a council briefing, so we're not going to be in a position that we can vote on anything tonight. But I think we can at least give some direction so that we're all on the same page and trying to expedite this process as much as possible. Ms. Dumont?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sandy, for clarifying last week. Chris, lawyer Chris, not Hoffman. Chris, I'm pretty sure we all have a lot of confidence and high regard for you and have been very satisfied with the work you have done over this last year with us. I would say that I would keep it as a stipend instead of putting it into the salary. And my concern with putting it into the salary is the compression of the salary scale of the leadership within Jacksonville Beach. And so that's where my concern would lie. Because that puts Chris not very far below Mike, who would and should have the highest salary. Checking all my notes. So that I'm not going to repeat things because it's a briefing, and that is my only concern. I would keep it as a stipend. I wouldn't put it into the base salary. And Chris, you have done a great job. Sandy was very well spoken in her explanation of how she viewed the citizen concern. Is how I'm going to put it. So that's all I've got. And yes, I do hope that you would rescind your resignation.
Thank you, ma'am. And I also didn't have the opportunity to talk to Phil about the language that we had in place being adequate. So, I mean, I'm completely fine, and I agree with that, keeping the salary level the same and using the stipend language if possible. Okay, Ms. Hoffman?
I just, again, don't want to repeat what others have said before me, but I do want to thank Ms. Golding for her statement and express my concern for keeping Mr. Ambrosio or having him rescind his resignation. I think that one of the biggest wake-up calls for me is that on one hand, we have a charter amendment on our ballot to increase the amount of votes it takes to fire a city manager or city attorney. And on the other hand, it only took the words of one to put that into jeopardy. But I think that also just speaks to the high moral ethics and integrity of Mr. Ambrosio, that when they were questioned, he took very distinct and immediate action. And I think that that's a good lesson for all of us. I know it's a hard one to learn. If Mr. Ambrosio rescinds his resignation, and I hope truly that he does, I would agree with keeping it a stipend as long as we're clear on that legally, because it is in relation to a certification. So he needs to keep that certification to continue the stipend. If that were ever to discontinue, then the stipend should also discontinue, as well as the compression, as Ms. Dumont mentioned, any other impacts on long-term salaries. So really appreciate everyone for their input here, and I do hope that Mr. Ambrosio will reconsider.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Doherty?
Thank you. Talking about the elections coming up as well, there are many things that are dealing with how the council or how the public view the council's ethics. And, once we have to remember we were in labor negotiations. And why, Sandy, I know your intent was not to question Chris's ethics, especially by taking a question from a member of the public. I mean, I get questions all the time, accusations. People say we're all unethical, we're ethical, you know. But it's just it's once you question somebody's ethics, of course they're going to react. I'm sure you would. I've been accused of unethical behavior too, but some people are crazy. Some people have maybe what they think are good reasons for doing it. But once it's done in the public, it kind of changes the dynamic, especially as what we talked about last week is that it was a negotiation. If this had came after the fact where we'd already agreed terms and conditions, certainly it would have actually changed the whole dynamic of things. But, you know, Chris could ask for a Rolls Royce at this point. We haven't agreed on his contract. We can say no to things. And so that's why I would hope that in future, when it comes to concerns, and I'm not just talking to Sandy, I'm talking to everybody, that maybe we should have a way of if you have extreme concerns, it needs to be done in advance. And of course, there needs to be a record. I would suggest emails going through the city manager so that we're all aware of what the concerns are, rather than in the middle of a negotiation bringing something like that up. Because as you can see, we may not have a city attorney now. It's entirely up to Chris's decision. And if that is the case, it's really setting us back, because I think he has done a tremendous job. I think he's infinitely better than the last one we had. He's been more approachable. He's a hard worker. I'm not saying Susan wasn't, but you know, I just think Chris has been refreshing, and I would hope that we can just put all this behind us. Sandy, I know you're an honorable person. You didn't mean any malice by it, but you know, the people talk, and if it looks like we're questioning people's ethics when there's no grounds for it, I could see why that, you know, makes us look a bit, things a bit dodgy. So Chris, hopefully you change your mind. And as far as the stipend, as long as it's legal, which it seems to be, and as long as it's ethical, which it seems to be, then, you know, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nichols?
Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, I fully support Chris Ambrosio. I feel he's done an outstanding job as our city attorney. He has worked unbelievably hard, and his ethical standard is just unbelievably high. Even when he was looking at coming on board, I knew who he was. I wouldn't say we were friends, we were acquaintances. And we even discussed that, you know, I think it was the right thing to bring forward that and be transparent that we knew each other. You know, we weren't friends. I had no idea he was going to apply, but his ethical standard is just very, very high. And it really disappoints me that got his ethics got questioned. And I mean, it also reflected on Phil as well. And I think he deserves an apology as well. I mean, he negotiated the contract with him, and Phil is an attorney also. And I mean, you know, being a part of the board is being a board attorney, I mean, is, you know, questions, when you start questioning an attorney's ethics, can be very, very damaging. Even if it proves out that it wasn't true, it still reflects very badly, just any other kind of being accused of anything else reflects badly on it. You know, and also, as Keith was saying, you know, that there has to be another way to do it. And I believe in our current ethics standards that we just approved, that there's a matter for addressing these issues, and we need to be doing that the right way. And you know, I part of this could be looked at as violating the ethics agreement that we have. I don't think Sandy intentionally did this, but if it was properly thought through, it should not have been brought up in council the way it was. I was very disappointed about that. Lastly, from a salary perspective, I mean, I understand the concept of, you know, the city attorney shouldn't have a salary as high as a city manager, but I disagree with that. I think you pay them what the market bears for them and their talents. I mean, or if our city manager doesn't stay with us anymore, are we gonna be locked into automatically paying him what our city attorney is being paid? I mean, you know, if Chris is here 10 years and we have a new city manager come in, it doesn't make any sense for us to say, okay, well, the city manager has to be paid more than the city attorney. So those are just a couple points I made. I'm very disappointed that this went the way it did. I really hope and pray that Chris reconsiders and withdraws his letter, and we can move forward and we can have him giving his outstanding service to the community for years to come.
Thank you, sir. And all of you that have your hand raised, if you're done, if you'd lower your hand, I'd appreciate it. Quick revisit, Ms. Dumont.
Thank you, Mayor. My note that was on a different piece of paper, apologize for that. I have way too many papers and stick-it notes like all over the place on issues. It's a madhouse over here. Moving forward, regardless of whether Chris rescinds or doesn't rescind, I'm looking at this as two pieces. First, this happened and whether he would stay as attorney or not stay as attorney. The second piece ends up being, how do we avoid this happening in the future? And this moves beyond just negotiations. This involves any time one of us receives an email about a Florida statute, an ordinance, a land development code question that is not included in our packet. It's on us to make sure that we research all statutes and codes and ordinances that are included in our packet so we understand the totality of what it is that we're voting on. When somebody emails a question that's something outside of that packet, we need a way to make sure the rest of the council knows that this may come as a question in the meeting. So if we are going beyond the packet, that's something that needs to go to the city manager and or the city attorney to then transmit that out to all of us. Because last week when Sandy was talking about that statute, I'm going, I don't know what that is. I'm not a lawyer. And the rest of us, Phil probably knew what it was, but the rest of us are going, lovely numbers. We like the 1123136. Lovely. But we cannot then vote or have a substantive conversation on those questions because we don't know what they entail. So I would suggest moving forward that we have some kind of a policy in place where if we are going beyond, if we are going with information beyond the council packet, that gets brought to the city manager and or the city attorney, and then that information then gets disseminated among council members so we all can do our own research and then have a vibrant discussion on the topic, question, or issue that's presented to us. And I still hope Chris Chris rescinds the resignation.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Vogelsang, quick revisit.
Just on that, and Ms. Dumont, I think that that's a good idea to the extent that it's vetted by us first. I mean, I get a lot of ridiculous thoughts that whether something applies or might not apply, and I don't think that we need to pass that information on. But if it's something you're truly, like you do your own research, you read it, and you question whether that applies or doesn't apply to whatever we're voting on, then I would agree. If you still have a question, then we should direct that communication to Mike or Chris, and then they can hopefully, if they can't get an answer, let us know. And if we have to table it till we get an answer, that's fine. But at least we'll hopefully then have an answer to that particular issue before the meeting. I just don't want to get caught where we're getting into the weeds on stuff and meetings start taking even longer because we're answering things that people bring up that really have no business being discussed.
Yeah, I mean, on anything that we would be presenting to
Right.
council saying, I got this question. So if it's just something that's nefarious, yeah, not that stuff, but things that we're going to bring up in a public meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification and also for the comments, Mr. Vogel saying. I think at this point, Mike, I guess, I don't want to put Chris on the spot tonight, but I think he can communicate via writing if he chooses to withdraw his resignation. And then if that were the case, do we need to have two council meetings, voting meetings, one to reevaluate the updated agreement, or can we just have Phil kind of wrap it up and bring it up for vote on Monday? Get this done.
Well, if you recall, the tabling of the item, we'll take that one first. The tabling of the item is continued till next Monday, which means the addendum as initially proposed will be reheard by council for a formal vote. So you don't need to do anything with that unless any of the council members want to make an amendment to that contractual addendum during the meeting on Monday night.
That being said, all we need is Chris to revoke his resignation.
Mayor,
Correct.
Mike, if you don't mind, I would like to have this one chance to speak. I didn't speak last when these events occurred at the meeting. Is it okay?
Yeah, by all means.
First, I'd like to say I appreciate all the words from the council members, and in particular, Ms. Golding. It means a lot to me to hear you say that. And I'm also glad that you contacted the Commission on Ethics and you feel comfortable that what I did was not a violation of any of the ethical standards. And I really appreciate everything that everyone's saying. You know, this was a coveted role and a coveted appointment that attorneys would love to have. And I'm honored to, be in this role. And I just want to give you and give the rest of our organization an understanding of where we're coming from now that you have an in-house Florida Bar licensed board certified attorney. And I recognize that this is new for the council members. This is new for the department heads. And this was the first year go around. It's been a really hard set of lessons for everybody. But it's important to know, I'd like everyone to know this, that, and I'm saying this because it's important that the organization knows that and the city and the council, that it has a attorney that is working for them hard every day with the principle guiding light is the highest ethical standards. And I would like to share that this started from day one at law school with training. And out of the council members, only Mr. Vogelsang could appreciate this. But when you're in law school, the first week of your law school, you are told to start practicing ethics. And you're pointed to the chapter 112 in the Florida statutes. You're mandated that you learn those and you never violate those. Those are the first lessons that were taught. It was so important to me to operate within the highest level of ethics that I became president of the ethics committee for the student body. I was involved in the ethics commission, and this is just as a student. It was going to be a foundation of how I practice law. Later, as Mr. Nichols said, this plays out in various ways. When Mr. Nichols found out that I applied for the position, and he contacted me and he said, I feel like it would be in the most prudent, transparent thing to do for me to announce that we were, friendly in Gainesville and we were friends. And my reply to him was, absolutely do that. And if it costs me the job, then at least we know we've done the right thing. So even before I've been given the privilege of having this position, I was already willing to lose the opportunity to have this position in order to remain ethical and transparent and doing the right thing. I'd like to add that perhaps you don't recall, but when this process of our first in-house attorney coming up for a potential renegotiation or my request for a salary adjustment or benefit adjustment, it was retained by the council for us to do this. I knew it wasn't a violation of any statutes. I knew that I wasn't anywhere close to violating any ethical statutes, and that my counsel preserved their authority for me to ask. And just as Mr. Doherty said, you can reject it and say, no, we'd like for you to continue on your indefinite term under your current agreement. All of this was retained. And the thought of any question of that being even close to an ethical violation, I had no concerns whatsoever because I knew that we were all doing the right thing. I had a stipend that was for this very board certification expert specialist from Monroe County. And, you know, Monroe County has a dozen attorneys, and it's not uncommon for local jurisdictions attorneys when I'm at seminars or meetings or conferences throughout the years, that it's understood that, you know, they'd like to get an incentive, or, you know, they're thinking about applying at another municipality because there's this incentive that if I get my board certification, I can get a stipend. I mean, there's nothing unethical about this at all. In fact, I worked for one of the most ethical people you could imagine in Monroe County. And he's very highly regarded in Tallahassee and all these different commissions. But I also want to remind the council that, and department and staff, that, you know, I called the Attorney General's office to find out how to do this, knowing this was the first go around for us. And I met with Ann and the mayor initially to discuss how do we go about doing this? And getting that uneasy feeling in my gut, I decided the best thing for a licensed attorney to do in the state of Florida, if there's a question or doubt, you call the Attorney General's office. So I called the Attorney General's office. How do I do this? This is the first for City of Jacks Beach. It's a first for me in the position for Jacks Beach. We want to do the right thing. I called the Attorney General's office and I recommended the council at a public meeting that we should, you know, follow along with what the Attorney General suggested. So, you know, again, I want you, my clients, my city council, my manager, my deputy manager, and department heads and staff, I want you to know that I need you to trust me. And I'm always looking out to do the right thing under the ethical guidelines and the rules that regulate us. And I mean us, licensed attorneys, as Mr. Wolf was saying, is bound by them as well. These are strict rules. I follow them all the time. By the nature of my position, and quite frankly, we've been very effective. And I want to commend Mike and Karen for their incredible team leadership, and us as a team at an executive level. We've been very effective. There's going to be a lot of attorneys in this city. Well, not a lot, but there's going to be a handful of attorneys that have interests that are suddenly more difficult to reach and achieve because now you have an in-house city attorney that's ready to do what's right for the city council and the city in the best interest of the city. I've got a target on my back. I am an impediment to them. The more effective I am, the more of a threat I am to what they want, what their intentions are, what their goals and interests are. I know that I have to live with that. But the real problem was that one of my bosses, I have 7 bosses, and one of my 7 bosses did something in public that is very difficult for an attorney. It's a small legal field in Florida. It's very difficult and very threatening to my profession, my professional status, my reputation, my integrity, my ability to still pick up the phone and after a few phone calls, get a really good job in this state. Things like public allegations against an attorney can turn into problems that I will never be able to recover from. I will be associated with the thoughts of intentional corruption, intentional wrongful conduct, intentional unethical behavior. Once those tags are put on me, all the years that I've put into this career and my prior partners, my prior employers, you know, God forbid if I have to, but future employers, my name is tarnished. My integrity and reputation is questioned. It also goes to a personal level. My friends start to question, well, if your boss accuses you of some sort of unethical behavior, I really wonder if there's any truth to that. People, you know, family and friends question that as well. But the reason why I had to act so quickly was because, it's a very confusing situation, but I do respect that Ms. Golding does not have familiarity with the critical nature of the ethical statutes that apply to me and all licensed attorneys in Florida. But we had conversations, and the ethics case and the statute that were being associated with me is the death of my career type of case. And for that case to somehow be associated with me by doing what I was doing that we're allowed to do by law, that is open and transparent, that my agreement with my counsel allows for us to do, that we put it forward that way. There's no element of that is actually in any way close to the statute or intentional unethical behavior or the code of ethics case that this person brought to Ms. Golding's attention. Again, I would venture to say this is probably a person that really doesn't want me around, and it's not good for their business. But after having that discussion with Ms. Golding, I was very, very concerned, because I've seen it over the years, that these types of things get tagged to an innocent attorney. And before you know it, that man or woman is dealing with the most unbearable things, and people around the legal industry are now questioning them. So I was very, very concerned. Our communication must not have been clear, but I really was trying to indicate the severity and the inapplicability of what was being proposed by this person. Then for the statements to be made public, and that statute to be associated with me, that's very damaging. And I want everyone to know in the organization, I want my clients to know that I addressed it with Mike and Karen on the next day, because it was these series of events that happened that were very, very concerning to me. And again, I needed to take action, because self-preservation is an instinct I have. And my reputation, my integrity, and my honor, my ability to maintain a successful professional career in this industry, and not having my license or certification with stripped from me, revoked or suspended, all of that is of critical nature, and you have to act quickly to try to stop that from those troubles from happening. So I'd like to again say that Mike and Karen, incredible leaders and incredible facilitators of success and group unity, incredible. But I shared that with them, and I told them how drastic that is, and that I can't have that happen to me in public. And then, unfortunately, there was a follow-up email that, and again, I realized Ms. Golding just wasn't familiar with the severity of what those statutes imply for a licensed attorney. But there was an email that follow-up that just gave me indication that either someone else was willing to try to develop these false allegations against me. And all I'm looking to do is, like every other employee, I mean, I get it. We all want more money. I just submitted an amendment that my counsel can reject. No, there's no big deal there, but this is developing into something that I probably would no longer be able to control. The only way that I could control it is to try to remove myself from the situation. And that's why I felt that I thought through what are the only ways that I can try to prevent this unfortunate event from happening to me, which I've seen false allegations get drawn out for years, and the attorneys fade away and they lose their career. And I've seen that over the years. And I thought, I can't let this happen. And how does an attorney recover from one of his bosses associating intentional unethical behavior statutes and cases with him? I mean, I get it. Some of these enemy attorneys may try to do that to me. There's going to be unhappy citizens that are going to say things that I'm incompetent, that I don't work hard enough, that I'm violating the law. I understand. I've got a target on me, and people will do that. But the seven most important people in terms of my practice are my clients that I owe a fiduciary duty to, and that you must always know that I am always behaving ethically and within the limits of the law at all times, every day, with every decision. If one of my bosses does something that indicates that that isn't happening, then it's time for me to go. It's also time for me to protect myself so that I can maintain a livelihood and keep a job somewhere in the state. So I just wanted everybody in this organization to know that that's what this is about. And I appreciate all the words that you have all said, and you know, the position's a very meaningful position for me. I've poured a lot of heart and soul into it. We've all lived through a unbelievably difficult year. And I got really emotional when I was with Mike and Karen, because as I'm looking at them, I'm thinking that these are the two executive leaders that I really am hoping to work with, and I hope to work with until the end of my legal career. That's what we're doing here. We're here for the long run. Of course, Karen's been here longer than any of us, but you know, Mike and I of course I came in after Mike, but we're all here for a lot of good work for a long time. And so it hurts. It hurts, and it was frightening to me to think that I may lose, or I may be tagged with things that I could possibly be tagged with. And that I just wanted the opportunity to explain that to my clients, the council, and so that the organization understands that. I need the organization, staff, department heads to always have faith that their first in-house city attorney is operating in the most truthful and ethical way with the best intentions, and that I have Florida statutes, I have rules regulating my profession, and I'm following all of those. I'm never close to violating any of those. And you can always trust in this city attorney that the city council has appointed. And I thank the city council for saying the things that they've said tonight, because it would help me to repair any damage that may have occurred by, you know, things like this happening. So that helps a lot. I appreciate that, and maintaining my professional integrity. Thank you. So I'll talk to Mr. Vogelsang later this week.
Thank you, Chris. And on behalf of the council, you know, I'd like to express that we're all sorry that this had to happen. We're glad that we were able to at least open up the communications quickly and limit the emotional impact to you and the professional impact to you. I think all of us have said in so many words that we're all very, very impressed with what you do and what you brought to the table. Very comfortable with how you handle yourself with the council on the dais, as well as with the council in your office. You've done a great job. I was certainly a part of the early discussions when before you went to the attorneys general, when we talked about different options and how to do this. I saw with my own eyes how important it was for you to make sure that you were doing everything above board. I don't think that this is something that we can't recover from. I think this is something that we can work together to kind of push our way through. And, you know, and again, on behalf of all seven of us, please accept my apology, as well as our gratefulness for your performance and what you do. We're awful glad to have you on the team, Chris. So thank you.
Mayor, I thank you very much. You've always been an incredible leader, and I appreciate it very much. And I just want everybody to know, I'm only one small piece of this incredible team. I don't want any special attention. I really just want to be successful for all these incredible department directors, people that come to meetings overly prepared, bringing more energy to the workplace to get things done in the right way for the city. I don't want any special attention. Yes, I'm the city attorney. Yes, Mike and I hold two unique positions within this organization. Mike as our organizational leader, and me as essentially the city attorney and general counsel for the department. But I don't want any more. I would like not to have any special attention. I don't want any of that, but I do appreciate everything that the council has done for me. It's an incredibly challenging position, but it is a very rewarding position. And so thank you, Mayor.
So thank you, Chris. And also want to thank Ms. Golding. I know it's challenging and difficult to stand in front of your peers and acknowledge when you wish you'd done things differently. And Sandy was very eloquent in your statement. And I'm sure very heartfelt from you to Chris. And hopefully that's a good first step of putting this whole thing behind each other and moving on. Ms. Dumont, do you have something else you want to add, or can we wrap this up?
We can quickly wrap it up once I get clarification on what the addendum to the contract is that you were talking about before. I believe the contract that went through was for the contract that was tabled was the same contract with no addendums because the requirements for the planning commission motion failed, and the salary at 160 was okay, and the $500 stipend per month was okay. So I'm wondering what the addendum is. So are you talking an addendum to his original contract, or are you talking an addendum to the?
I don't think that we need an addendum based off of what Phil said about the stipend can stay the way it is on the agreement.
Okay, so our next meeting, we're just going to be re-looking at the same contract that we looked at last week.
Assuming we have a withdrawal of the resignation, yes.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing else for the council this evening. So with that being said, that'll conclude tonight's council briefing, and we will all meet again next Monday at 6 o'clock in council chambers for our in-person meeting. See you then.
Thanks, you guys.